Next, please, as time runs out. Would you kindly finish your commentary? You were giving a comment on the pandemic and how the pandemic helped to generate this inflation, and you were stopped in the middle of your comment. So would you go back through that, please, so that the public at large can get a better understanding of what actually happened with the pandemic and inflation?
So I'd be glad to, and I think people are now, we have a few years to look back. I think the more years that pass, the clearer we can see what was happening. But I think you look back now, and you're seeing this, broadly what was happening was governments did a lot to support economic activity during the pandemic, and on the theory that, there could be really serious economic bad times ahead. Then the economy reopened, and it reopened very, very strongly. And I think in hindsight, you can see that there was just a lot of support for demand from fiscal policy, from monetary policy, and that supply was constrained. You couldn't make cars. Supply chains were tangled up. There were shortages of so many things. So what happened was we got a burst of inflation, and the United States got a big burst of inflation, really more from demand than other countries did. Then you have the war in Ukraine, which gave a big burst of inflation more to Europe than to us. And so you wind up with a situation where you've just got a lot of inflation, and my thinking at the time was it's going to take restrictive monetary policy, and it's going to take time for the supply side and demand side distortions from the pandemic to unwind. 2023 was the year when that kind of happened. So supply chains were fixed, the labor shortage was greatly alleviated, and unemployment remained very low. Inflation came down by a very large amount last year, while growth remained quite strong. So this was the year that kind of proved that thesis. Now we're in 2024, and it's a question of finishing the job on inflation, which we're committed to do, while also keeping a strong labor market, which we're also committed to doing. And that's a balance that we have to strike in our policy. But I think we know more now about where this came from, because we can see what made it go away. And it was a combination of supply and demand, as we had kind of expected.
And two of the most significant factors were the pandemic and the war with Ukraine. Is that correct?
Yes, and it's also the fact that the pandemic summoned forth a great fiscal and monetary response, and that contributed to really strong activity and to inflation, without question.
We're going to run out of time, but I have to ask, if not for that monetary response, I know that it's a counterfactual, but would we have possibly gone into a depression?
That's what we thought at the time, and I think mainstream economists were very concerned that we'd never literally shut the global economy down for a period and then tried to reopen it. We didn't know how long it would take or how well that would go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman's time has expired. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lucas, who's recognized.